In those days, the Crest was in service to the Shade, protectors of Heartvale. Our journey from Heartvale, though eventful, is now complete. Davennar stands before us, and I, for one, am ready to disembark from this ship. I have asked our resident Veilers for their thoughts on Davennar, and most have answered with a spit and a grumble. Perhaps more urbane in his education, young Whinstone referred to it as the City of Spines, and the City that Bleeds, though he is unsure if those epithets are used within the city. Our first order of business is to find lodging and set up a base of operations. Next, we must connect with the Shade operative who will serve as our contact within the city. I am unsure if the unsettling Shade hunters who have accompanied us on the voyage will remain with us, though I doubt any of our number will be sorry to see them go if they choose to lodge elsewhere. I am certain the Lieutenant and Iron Gull have sorted out those small details. For now, as we approach the city, I can finally see why Whinstone used the words City of Spines. Great stones jut from the water like spears, forming a defensive perimeter around the island upon which Davennar stands. Ships patrol like great sea beasts, waiting for a tasty morsel to show even the barest threat. From what I have heard, and can now see with my own eyes, they must take great delight in forcing ships onto the Spines. There are at least a dozen such hapless vessels there right now. Beyond the Spines, the island begins, and from what I can see, there is no breath of space wasted. Buildings built upon each other, towering higher even than the buildings of Heartvale. I can almost hear the bustle and roar of the city across this distance. It feels alive and hungry, ready to devour us as it has done with so many before. This city that bleeds, this city of spines that seems so formidable, will soon learn that the Crest are no tasty morsel. We have the razor's edge on a longsword wielded by our patron, and somewhere in that gullet is our quarry. We'll find them and carve them out. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, the Crest arrive in Davennar, only to find that entering the City of Spines may be more challenging than expected. Find out what happens on episode 51, A Tasty Morsel. Last time, Arid performed a ritual on Ben and Orchid, and it seemed as though he was successful. But when they decided to try and test the protective elements of that ritual by using the Claw of Vargosh that they have in their possession, Lathalia refused to part with it, and refused, in fact, to even allow them to try and do anything with it. Ben thought about stealing the artifact from her, but realized that that was probably going to create more problems than solutions, and Orchid insisted that if the captain trusts the lieutenant, then they should trust her as well. They continued their journey towards Davennar and encountered a group of 5 pirate ships, which slowly boxed them in and entered battle with them. The Crests and Drift Sailors repelled boarders, and Lathalia, in a show of true power, unleashed a lightning storm upon these ships, destroying all of them. At last, the Undania comes within sight of Davennar, and as they draw closer, that is where we begin. The Andanya cuts through the water, approaching the city of Davennar, the city of spines, the city that bleeds. As they draw close, there are a number of Davennaran warships that are patrolling the entryway to the city. Davennar is surrounded by these rocky outcroppings that jut out like spears, and the entirety of the island is surrounded by these, except for a small channel that leads through into a natural harbor. As they're approaching, Ben is looking at these spines, and he has heard about Davennar. He has grown up in Heartvale with Davennar being their greatest rival. He has even fought against Davennaran warriors and warships during the last war with Davennar, but he has never come within sight of the city itself. And I think as he is standing on the bow and he's looking out across the water at this densely packed city on this island, surrounded by these spines, he marvels for a moment at the sheer strength and power that this city exudes. As the Andanya approaches that entryway, that passage of safety through these spines, a Davennaran warship cuts across the water to intercept them. There's a quick exchange of signals, and the Andanya, being a drift ship, has made this journey many times before. And so I think they have all of the passcodes and any of the required sort of signals to indicate that they indeed are allowed to be here. And I think more so because this is a dangerous area of the sea to try and navigate. They're indicating to this Davennaran warship that they do not need an escort. They don't need a ship to come along and guide them through the passage into the harbor. That Steward Seta of the Andanya knows how to guide her ship through the passage to safety. These exchanges go back and forth, and I think Arid, standing beside Ben, says, "Do you think they will board us and do an inspection? It seems like a natural thing for them to do with the defensive measures that are present." Ben nods and says, "I think it's likely, yes, but..." And he sort of looks back at the signals that are passing back and forth. It seems as though the Andanya has made this trip enough times that perhaps they're known to the Davennarans. We may not have to be inspected out here on the sea. I doubt that we will be able to enter the city without announcing ourselves in some way or another, but we may get to wait until we are on the docks before we have to do so. I wonder what they will think of a mercenary company coming to their city from Heartvale. Ben smiles and says, "My friend, I can assure you, Davennar has many companies of mercenaries coming and going. I doubt they will think twice about us. After all, we're not here for them." And so, as the Andanya is exchanging these signals and approaching the city of Davennar, why don't we go ahead and set our scene? So our last chaos factor was at 8, and our scene was to survive the pirate attack. We did that, and I feel like we did it under a great deal of control. So I'm going to reduce the chaos factor down to 7 as we set up this new scene, which is going to be enter the city of Davennar. And I'm going to roll my d10 and compare it against my chaos factor of 7, and we'll see how this scene setup plays out. I rolled a 7, which is equal to the chaos factor, which I believe means that it is going to be an altered scene. So I think maybe we should ask the question. Is there going to be an inspection here out on the sea? I think because of everything I established with the Andanya being here multiple times, I'm going to say it's very unlikely. Chaos rank of 7. 23. Yes, there is going to be an inspection. So the alteration to this scene is that instead of entering the city of Davennar, they have to undergo an inspection by this Davennaran military ship. So our new scene is to undergo inspection. And as we begin, I think there is a question here, which is the Crest are probably not going to get blinked at, but these occult infiltrators from the Shade are probably not going to be welcomed into Davennar. Obviously, they would have planned for this event. Are they disguising themselves in some way to seem like members of the Crest or like members of the Drift? Or are they using arcane means to avoid detection? So I think let's go ahead and see if they would disguise themselves as the Crest. That seems like the easiest way to get them through sort of this inspection, is because the Crest are already there. They have a number of interesting individuals anyways, so throwing in a couple weird veiled occult hunters probably isn't going to make that much of a difference. So are they trying to conceal themselves as members of the Crest? I think that's very likely. Let's go ahead and roll on our chaos rank of 7. 68 is a yes. So they are disguising themselves as members of the Crest. I think, again, this is something that they have pre-planned. So Urdira and these occult infiltrators are sort of covered with cloaks, which have badges of the Crest on them, and they are sort of broken out and distributed amongst the rest of the Crest soldiers as though they are part of this group. And I think they are probably, trying to appear pretty casual. So as the Davennaran warship, much like Heartvale's warships, is a trireme. So it has this sort of ornate prow that acts as a ram. It has oars cutting out to the sides, and it is closing in towards them as they have signaled that they must do an inspection of the Andanya. Steward Seta has passed this information on to the Crest, and I think Lephalia and Iron Gull have arranged the occult infiltrators and Urdira into the midst of the Crest, and then they are waiting to receive this inspection as the rest of the members of the Crest are acting casual, and they are playing cards, just kind of like sitting around watching as this is going on. And the ship closes in, and I think it comes alongside of the Andanya. Hooks are cast over, and the two ships are basically locked into place together. And then a plank is laid down between them, and a series of Davennarans cross over. The officer in charge of this Davennaran boarding party approaches Steward Seta, and they exchange brief pleasantries. And then I think the steward gestures to the lieutenant and Master Sergeant Iron Gull, who step forward. And the Davennaran officer says, "What is your business in our city?" Lephalia says, "We have a contract to pursue a group of criminals who have come to Davennar. It is our intention to find them and return them to our patron, and then we will be done in your city." The Davennaran officer looks at her, and Iron Gull looks around, says a few words in Davennaran, which I think Ben hears. And as we established before, he speaks Davennaran, and It's basically an order to look around and just check and make sure that there's nothing odd. The officer proceeds to say, "You're after some criminals then. Are these criminals that we as officials of the Davennar state need to worry about?" Lephalia smiles and says, "Oh no, they are petty things, but we will take them out of your city, as long as that is all right. I have a full contract here." And I think this is another thing that they would have prepared, and it is a copy of the physical contract that they have made and signed. But I think instead of it being the genuine contract between the Red Fox of Heartvale and the Crest, it names some random noble, and it names the crimes that these so-called criminals have committed, which are basically down to like theft and destruction of property and some things that do not really seem like they could be a like state secret. And the Davennar officer is going to peruse this contract as his men look around. So here's the question for the fate chart. Do they pass this inspection? I think it is very likely, again. Chaos rank of 7. 100. Which is an exceptional no. Okay, that is interesting. So why would they not pass this inspection? Everything is in order other than this contract being forged. How are they getting turned away here? So we've already established in Heartvale that the Vidala and the cult of Vargosh has expanded its claws into members of society around here. Is this officer a cultist of Vargosh? Is this bad luck on the part of the Crest that this officer is somehow connected to the Vidala family? Because I think in this forgery, these criminals are named as the Vidalas. And because I think that would give them a certain legitimacy to like hunt down people of that name. And so maybe this officer recognizes that name and refuses them entry. I think it's very unlikely that this random officer is a cultist of Vargosh. But let's find out. It's still a 50% chance. 91 is an exceptional no. Again, that's the second exceptional no. So he's not a cultist of Vargosh by any means. So it has nothing to do with their mission here that has him fail their inspection. Maybe it's the exact opposite. Maybe he is also incredibly prejudiced against Heartvale, and he sees that this contract comes from a Heartvale noble and that this ship came out of Heartvale, and he just says, "I'm sorry, but you are not allowed entry into the city. You must return where you came from." And he is going to hand back the contract. And I think the lieutenant says, "I beg your pardon? What do you mean we are not allowed entry?" The officer looks at Lephalia and says, "Just that. You are not allowed entry into our city. I apologize for the inconvenience, but you must leave now." And he says again in Davennar to his crew to rally back to the ship. And I think Lephalia is about to say something when Steward Seta steps forward and says, "Excuse me, you cannot simply refuse entry to a drift ship. We have certain treaties in place that allow us to come and go at our leisure." The officer kind of half turns and says, "Are you telling me what I, an officer of the Davennar state, can and cannot do?" If you would like your ship dashed upon the spines, I'm happy to oblige, but if you refuse to vacate this area, that is what will happen to you. Is this officer the captain of this ship, or is he a lesser officer? I think it's unlikely that he's the captain of the ship. 69. No, he is not the captain of the ship. So he is a lesser officer, which means I think that the Crest and the steward of the Andanya can make an appeal to the captain. So Steward Seta says, "Officer, I didn't catch your name, but I certainly caught your rank. I would like to speak with your captain. As steward of this drift ship, it is my right and purview to discuss this error with your captain." The officer sort of stiffens and then says, "Very well. You may discuss this with my captain. Steward, you may come with me. The rest of you remain here." And he's going to lead Steward Seta across to the Davennaran warship, and he is going to introduce her to the captain. Now, we're going to take another shot at this. She explains the situation to the captain. He explains his side, and I think he comes up with some, excuse for why he didn't pass them, other than just that they're from Heartvale. Is the captain more sympathetic to the steward's plight than this officer is? I think it is likely that he is. 64 is a yes. So they have this conversation back and forth, and the steward conveys her displeasure at being refused entry when they have complied with all of the Davennaran demands, and that her passage is assured to her passengers, and that the officer has no solid grounds to refuse their entry. And I think the officer tries to come up with some excuse that as a mercenary company that is hunting down a criminal, that they are trying to circumvent the legal authority of Davennar, and that if the company would like to wait on their ship while Davennaran authorities investigate these criminals, perhaps they could be delivered to the ship without the crew ever having to land. This goes back and forth, and I have an idea of what could budge the captain one way or the other, and I feel as though Steward Seta would know what it is. So I'm going to ask the question of the fate chart. I think it is very likely that this would budge him. 5 is an exceptional yes this time. Okay, so here's how this goes down. The captain of the Davennaran ship says, "I have heard both of your pleas, and while I don't disagree with your concerns, second officer, this mercenary company is not expressly forbidden from following its contract into the city and pursuing these criminals so long as they do not break any of our own laws. And you're quite correct, Steward. You and your ship have a right to passage through our waters. But I think really the thing that we're all struggling with here is there are certain wheels of bureaucracy that need to be greased in order for such passages to be maintained. And if we can come to some sort of arrangement, those wheels can be greased." And the steward, although I think a little incensed by what he's suggesting, always knew that this was a possibility. And she smiles and sort of hides the frustration behind a veneer of civility and says, "Why, of course, Captain. As an honorable steward of a drift ship, I would not wish for anyone yourself, Captain, or you, Second Officer, to struggle with the bureaucratic rumblings of your city. I understand that there are many levels of your city's government that require certain assurances that business will continue forthrightly. And so I am happy to discuss a proposal with my passengers, and we will see what we can accomplish. The captain says, "Good, very well. Go discuss with your passengers. We will wait here." The steward returns to the Andania and looks across at Lephalia and Irongull, and I think she basically breaks it down for them as simple as she can, which is they want a bribe. This is not unusual in Davennar. It is a city that is rife with crime, and there are a number of influential crime lords that have their hands deep in the pockets of even the coastal patrol. If we pay them, we will gain entrance to the city. If we do not, I'm afraid this journey will be a waste. There's a brief discussion. Does the Crest have enough coin on hand to pay this bribe? I feel like it is very likely that they do. They've been doing pretty well for themselves since they've been in Heartvale. 90, which was almost a no, but still a yes. Just under the wire with a 90. Irongull, Saga, and Lephalia confer, and then some coin is brought out of the strongbox that they are carrying with them. And Saga counts it out and passes it over. The steward returns and hands it over to the captain, and the captain of the Davennaran ship looks at it and says, "It's a pleasure doing business with you. Welcome to Davennar." And a few moments later, the hooks are removed. The ships drift apart, and then they get underway towards the city. I think that is where we can end this scene, and I feel like that was a little chaotic. So I'm going to raise the chaos factor back up to 8, because the amount of hoops that they had to jump through just to get into the city was considerable. So now that they have bypassed sort of the coastal patrol, and I think they get a writ of entry from the Davennarans that they can show when they reach the docks, so they don't have to go through another inspection when they arrive. They are sailing towards the city, and as they do so, they are drawing closer and closer to these spines. They can see these ships that have been driven into them, and now that they're closer, what they see is these smaller vessels that have seemingly rowed out from the island and are basically picking through the wreckage. And it looks as though there are like small barges that are collecting pieces of wood as these scavengers strip them off of the boats that have been speared on these spines. And there are just all these scavengers crawling all over these ships and seemingly picking them clean. And I think as they're drawing closer to the harbor, they're going through this area and they're watching this. Orchid, who's now standing beside Ben, is like, "What are they doing over there? Looks like they're pecking through it like a scavenger bird, going through some carcasses." Ben nods and says, "That is an apt description, Orchid, because the city is built on a small island, and they have leveled all the trees and taken all the timber and everything that they could have already. Oftentimes, they will scavenge wood from ships that they drive onto the spines. I've heard stories that they have a quota of ships that they must drive onto the spines every year in order to maintain the scavenger market. I feel like that is a myth about Davennar to make them seem more fearsome and terrible, because they also have control of the land beyond them. They can send out teams to cut down trees and haul them back to Davennar. So it is not as though they only get the wood for their building operations just from ships that have been driven onto the spines. But it certainly is a more fanciful tale if they do. Huh. Scavenging wood from ships they drive onto the spines and then using them for their own ships and their own buildings. It's kind of diabolical. I love it a little bit. I thought you might. As the Andanya draws closer, they see now the harbor. This island that Davennar is built on has a variety of elevations. But this particular spot where the harbor is, it's a low kind of like sloping hill that descends down to a few sections of land that sort of jut out and form a natural harbor. And then there are quays that have been built out. And there's a number of ships that have docked. They can see goods being unloaded. There are ships anchored in the harbor as well. As they approach, once again, Steward Seta is signaling with someone on the shore and is guiding the ship towards a particular anchor point. In the distance, on a corner of this harbor, is a tall lighthouse. It's ancient, and it is flashing a light, and I think this is actually where the steward is signaling. And Ben, looking up at that, says, "That must be the compass. Malteser's compass." What's that then? It's similar to our Vixilio War College. It's an academy where they train their navigators. I've heard stories that in their final year, students are required to go out and sail the spines and navigate their way through safely with no assistance. And those who pass graduate, and those who fail, well, if you're lucky, you drown. Well, that doesn't seem like a good way to train students. Think of it as a final exam. Those who pass are worthy of the navigator's label. And let me tell you, Davennarans take their navigators seriously. The Andanya reaches its anchor point, and the oars are stowed, the sails are raised. Now here's the question. Ben is well experienced with Heartvale and Davennaran ships. His eyes look over the harbor. Does he notice a ship that could be of Heartvale make? I'm thinking, of course, of the Tagaro, the ship that brought the Vidala to this place. I think it's impossible that he recognizes it. I talked about the chaos factor going out, but I never rolled to actually set up my scene. So I'm going to make this roll at chaos factor of 7, because I'm going to count this as still part of them entering the city, and then we'll set up our next scene. So chaos rank of 7. 12 is a yes, because at chaos rank of 7, they only had a 15% chance of getting a yes. Ben is looking out, and I think because it was such an impossible chance and it was so close, and because he didn't get an exceptional yes, I think he looks out and he sees this ship and he says, "Huh, that is curious. That ship over there is Heartvale in make, but it is not flying any colors of Heartvale. Curious. I wonder what that ship is." And he is curious about that ship. And so I think what I'm going to do as a part of that yes is I'm going to make that a thread of discover the identity of the Heartvale ? Ship. And then let's go ahead and end our scene there, or maybe more appropriately, begin our next scene there as the Andanya has now arrived in Davennar, in the district of Tower Luminous, the sub-district of Davir's Embrace. And their mission now is to find a base of operations, because they need to find a base of operations, and then they need to meet their Shade contact. So we're raising the chaos factor once again to 8, and then we're going to roll our D10 and see how this scene setup plays out. I rolled an 8. So that is equal to the chaos factor, which means it's going to be an interrupt scene. So with an interrupt scene, let's go ahead and roll to determine our event focus. 65. PC negative. Okay. And let's go ahead and roll action and subject. 64. Spy. It's a good start. And 77, which will not trigger another random event. Spy trials. Spy and trials. So spy obviously makes me immediately think that the Crest are being watched when they land. And I feel like I'm just going to have to go with that, because that is the thing that is jumping out at me. And who would be spying on them? It could be some faction here within Davennar, or it could be the Vidala family. Maybe those petty seers that they have had a vision of the Crest arriving, and so they sent someone to keep an eye out. And this is a PC negative. I think it's more likely that it's the Vidala. So I'm going to say it's very likely. We're going to roll. Our chaos factor is 8. 31 is yes, absolutely. It's the Vidala. So I think this interrupt scene that we see is we've seen the ship enter the harbor. They've moored, and now the members of the Crest are being ferried to the docks via boats. As this is going on, we cut away to the docks, and it's a bustling day here in Davennar, and the docks are full of people moving around, unloading ships, loading ships, and there is a tall man with a hood thrown over his head, standing in the shadow of a building. He's watching as these boats are bringing in Crest soldiers, and I think he sees Ben and Arid and Orchid and the others getting out of the boats and sort of congregating on the dock as they are looking around, sort of getting a lay of the land. And I think he is watching them, and as he does so, his hand kind of by his belt is fingering the hilt of a sword. And looking out at them, he sort of mutters to himself. He says, "So these are the ones who threatened my sister. Yes, little Crestlings. Find your bearings. Find a safe place for you to sleep tonight. And then, when you least expect it, I'll be there. I'll cut you down in the service of my mother, my sister, and the Dread Beetle." And then we kind of like pull back and away. And I think we can now be aware that as we continue this scene, which is to find a base of operations, that this individual, who we know as Destrian Vidala, is watching them. And I think we probably will find a place where we can make a roll on whether or not they notice that they're being watched. But I think regardless, wherever they go and whatever sort of base of operations they find, they're being followed. Their enemy is going to know where they're located. Let's get into the scene. The soldiers of the Crest are going to be split up into groups and sent out to find a sort of reasonable place for them to stay. And obviously, then Arid and Orchid get grouped together and sent out. Now, they know that there's something going on in Mudside, which is this district part of the Stilts to the sort of south of where the harbor is. So I think Ben is going to head in that direction. And to do so, he's going to have to pass out of Devir's Embrace into Sextant. That's where the compass, this ancient lighthouse, is located. There's naval quarters and training and stuff like that there. And then there is another district called Everall's Purse, and that's where like merchants are located. And then there's a bridge across a canal into Mudside. How long does it take for them to sort of find their way through? I think Ben has spent some time reading about Davennar. I think he has a sense of what the sort of shape of the city is. So I think it's likely that he can find his way to the purse pretty quickly. So we'll say it's likely. Chaos rank of 8. 47 is a yes. So he really has no issues making his way through the city. How difficult is it for him to find a place to stay? There are lots of inns in this district because it's the closest to the harbor and because this is a merchant district, much like the Scales. And so there are going to be a lot of visiting merchants that are going to want to stay close to sort of the shops and the stalls and everything that are in Everall's Purse. So I think it is pretty easy for them to find an inn. The question is, can they find something that is going to accommodate, 20 plus Crest soldiers? Or are they going to have to break it out and have people stay in multiple inns? So I think it's unlikely, I'm going to maybe even say very unlikely, that they're going to find an area that is going to work for all of them. So we'll call it very unlikely, still a 65% chance of a yes. 33 is a yes, and it triggers a random event. So they find a place. Let us determine our random event focus here. 19. NPC action. Okay. So if we look over at our list of NPCs, we have Iron Gull, Lephalia, the Vidala family, Merrick, Urdira the Shade, the Fell Sword, Gillen, the King's Word, and Reinhold Philiphant. So let's roll a d10. I'll just re-roll on 10s. 2, Lephalia. So this is an NPC action regarding Lephalia. This could be very good or very bad. I don't know which. We're going to find out. 80, Trust. And the subject, 45, Trust, Illness. Trust, Illness. So there's one illness that comes immediately to mind, which is whatever this wasting disease that's going on in Mudside that may be connected to the Vidala. But there's another illness that is more subtle, which is this corruption within Lephalia. And Trust, Illness. I wonder if she's aware that she has this seed of corruption, this hold on her from these artifacts. But I wonder if she also thinks and is like confident that she can use that to locate the Vidala. That is going to be going on while the others are out hunting for a place for them to stay. So I'm just going to do a quick roll here on Maze Rats for an inn that they can stay at. So I'm going to roll on adjective and noun. 5 and 4. Shivering. 6 and 3. Swan. Shivering Swan. So, Ben, Arid, Orchid, find the Shivering Swan. It has rooms aplenty for the members of the Crest, and it's relatively close to Mudside. So they return back to the docks. They find Iron Gull and the others and inform them of their discovery. Iron Gull gathers the Crest back together. I think at this point, we should probably also ask the question real quick. Are the occult infiltrators staying with the Crest, or are they going off on their own? I feel as though they're going to go off on their own, which I think is very likely. 65 is a yes. So they pieced out as soon as they landed, but Erdira is still with the Crest, and they head out to the Shivering Swan to get settled in. And then I think we cut away from that, and we see Lephalia. Now, she is this beautiful sorceress who is sort of walking through the streets. And I think her passage is noted. Her passage is noted by many, many people. But she is ignoring those around her, because in her bag that she's carrying is the Claw of Vargosh. And I feel as though she has reached in and in this almost weird form of intimacy has curled her fingers around the claw as if she's holding its hand. And she is sort of murmuring under her breath and chanting a refrain. She's drawing on the power of the artifact. And I feel like as she's walking through the streets and she's sort of walking with half-closed eyes, trying to sense where the Vidala might be located, we sort of pan out from her walking the streets, and then we close back in towards the temple, down through the halls and through that passageway that leads deep underground to that pool where the Mother Vidala is still sitting. And she has her eyes closed. Her daughter Cleopha is across from her, watching her. And then the mother's eyes open, and there's a smile on her face as she says, "My daughter, our enemies have arrived, and they brought with them a tasty morsel." Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thank you so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or buy me a coffee at coffee.com/errantadventures. That's ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.